So this is the introduction slide, and this is our 24th monthly Building Electrification webinar. I thank everybody for attending. We've literally had hundreds and hundreds of people over time now. And so tonight's going to be a mixed bag of things that we're going to cover. The primary guests are on the line here, Ken and Chris, who are the homeowner that we're going to feature, and Chris is the winning bidder for the heat pump that he installed. And we were just chatting about what happened last night in the coldest day of the year so far. Okay, so I'm going to start with a quick overview of why electrification makes financial sense, and why Ken needed to convert from his old furnace and air conditioner, and how he went about selecting HVAC vendors. And I'm going to do an analysis of those bids that Ken received, and neither of them have seen this data, so it might be of a great interest to them. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ken and Chris, and both said they'd be responsive to our questions, so I'll make sure we ask the questions to lead them on. At the end of that, we'll have questions and answers, and Pat will be the host for that. And then if time is available, we'll have a review of IRA incentives that will drive people to want to electrify their house. And so that's the agenda for today. We have recording on now. Pat is busy admitting people, and I'm going to go on and just start our discussion.
Let me just say that if you have a question that you think of while Ken or Chris or Steve are talking, just put it in the chat, and we'll handle them probably at the end.
Okay, so I'm going to give you two or three examples of why electrification makes sense. This is Pat in my house. We installed the heat pump 2 years ago, and this was 2022 energy costs. Over to the right, though, I'm going to try to get rid of this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to minimize.
It looks fine.
It looks okay?
It's
blocking
fine.
part of it. Okay. I need to change my label. Pat, can you rename me while I'm talking? Is that possible?
Oh,
see if you can.
I'll try.
So the first example is our own house, and the installation of that one heat pump, and we have 2 air conditioners. I replaced one with a heat pump, saved us in the first year 23% of our total gas and electric, and resulted in an 83% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in 2023, these energy costs are going to be lower because we have a heat pump, water heater, that's now been installed 1 full year, and that will have reduced both the CO2 emissions and also our electric bill and gas, increased the electric bill a bit, but increased the gas bill. And the final thing is this year we have community solar supplying our electricity. And that means electricity no longer has a greenhouse gas content. It's 100% clean, and it's 21% lower than we paid before. So we're very pleased with what we expect this table to look like in this coming year. Second example is our church, UUC, MC. And I was on the solar committee that made part of this happen in the last 3 years or so. So this is like a large commercial building, a lot of activities day in and day out. It also has a preschool included. So we replaced 6 furnaces with heat pumps. And then we installed a large rooftop solar array to power those heat pumps. And the result was 81% reduction in our bill, total gas and electric bill, and a 79% in total CO2 reduction. In fact, we still have 1 gas furnace still in operation, and I've been on the warpath to try to eliminate that, and eventually I'm sure we'll succeed, because this shows we pay off by going with heat pumps. And the final example is whole webinar devoted to this. Matt Kavanaugh showed us his energy master plan for his house, using his own house as an example. And he actually has a business called greeninsight.green that tries to advise people on how to develop energy plans. So this shows that he was able to reduce his CO2 emissions to zero within 5 years, actually a little over 4 years. And he was able to greatly reduce his total energy use. And that's including that used by his own 2 cars. So it's really amazing. And a little bit about the economics of this. He had a positive cash flow after 5.5 years. And then he has expected a $159,000 positive cash flow over 25 years. That's a 200% return on investment, or an 88% return on investment overall. So he's showing that, in fact, electrifying your house makes a lot of sense. It reduces your expenses and it saves the world's heating up with your emissions from burning gas. So tonight we're going to feature Ken's house. It's in Parsippany. It's a lovely bi-level. There's no basement. The next slide is going to show his a little furnace room that hidden behind here, behind that cement column is block column is his furnace, and behind that is his presently gas water heater. So I'm going to breeze through this pretty quickly because the material has been mentioned is covered in depth in previous webinars. But Ken received from his first vendor a whole series of bids. The first was for simple air conditioners plus a variable speed or if it's 1 or 2 speed furnace. The series of bids from $13,000 up to $21,000. And when Ken balked at that, I hope, Ken, I'm not stealing your thunder. I'm sort of paraphrasing what you told me.
You analyzed this more than I did.
Okay,
so go ahead.
Okay. And so when you balked at, see, where's the heat pump in this? The vendor then said, okay, I can throw in a Bosch heat pump with an inverter. It works in weather conditions down, what does it say, down below 35 degrees. I'm sorry, that's sort of hidden. Let me see, I can move that.
No, it's easy to see.
We see it.
We see it, okay.
See it.
All right, and then to make it even more enticing, when Ken was still saying, hey, where's all my bids for heat pumps? They then threw in Amana heat pumps. I think their whole product line is Amana based, by the way. That vary between $2,200 and $1,700. It was a 3.5 ton Amana heat pump. Again, it's with a fossil fuel backup furnace, plus a heat strip for use under 35 degree temperatures. Now, what does this all mean? How does somebody like Ken figure out what does that all mean? And I want to take you through the way that this can be analyzed. And there are sources, databases online that anybody can go to for any given heat pump that show the specs. And the red lines in here are plotted on that site. This is the upper spec, the maximum heat output from the final winning bid from Chris, from the Mitsubishi PUZ model series of heat pumps. And what's missing on this is the heat loss of Ken's house. And I use this, and I'll show you in a second why this particular curve is one I used. But I just estimated what the heat loss would probably likely be for his house. It's not quite correct here. Somebody's going to cite me in this, but the bottom of it starts at 68 degrees, which would be your normal room temperature. And the top of it continues on past that upper limit for the Mitsubishi heat pump the point where they intersect is called the balance point, and that's an industry standard term. It means the heat output of the heat pump is exactly equal to the heat loss of that house. When the temperature at that temperature, which in this case is 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and when the temperature drops below 5 degrees, the house starts cooling off because that heat pump can't produce any more heat. So that's the essence of this curve. And it's interesting. So what I did is I used something that I learned actually 2 years ago. I started doing an analysis for my own purpose of creating the balance point. In this case, a very simple off-the-shelf single-speed Rheem 36, that's 3-ton heat pump. And I said, well, what if I replace one of my air conditioners, only one, with a heat pump? What happens? And what happens is my entire house could be heated down to about 34 degrees by that one heat pump. And if the heat pump only heated my first floor, I could heat the heat pump would be good down to about 24 degrees, it says. And so I installed that heat pump and replaced only the air conditioner and kept everything else the same. And I was within 2 degrees of the actual performance of that heat pump for both of these things. My house actually has a big open area between the first and second floor. So the heat for the first floor heat pump rises to the second floor with I'll put a fan in as well to try to balance it. And so this works really well. And so when I used a curve that actually is right between the two. So what I assumed for Ken's house was right in the middle, right through here. And the result, again, it's so busy, I'm sorry. But the result for the 3 heat pumps, for the Bosch, shown here, for Ken's house, there's a 27-degree balance point. For the Amana heat pumps that the first vendor was proposing, it was an 18-degree balance point. And for the Mitsubishi heat pump, the balance point was 5 degrees. Now, 5 degrees turns out to be the minimum design temperature, actually a little bit less than Parsippany, New Jersey. And hopefully you never get below 5 degrees. But what happens if it does go like a cold night, and Ken likes to turn down his thermostat anyway, the house would cool off a little bit on a cold night going below 5 degrees. And the next day it would warm back up. And so that 5-degree balance point is so nice. That's without auxiliary heat. Now, Chris specified the use of first gas furnace and then secondly, a heat strip to heat beyond that balance point for the house. And I really wonder if that's ever going to be used, but we'll talk about that later. So I hope that's understandable. Pay only attention to only those 3 things. And this is a really fast, easy way to evaluate the performance of heat pumps for your house, if you can figure out the heat loss of your house. There's one simple way that I use for my house to calculate my heat loss. I use the amount of gas used on cold winter nights, actually for a long period, maybe a week-long period. I think I used a month-long period, in fact. And that was almost exactly what my house requires. For heat from the gas is what my house requires to stay warm up through the balance point. And so that's where this curve comes in. You can calculate it as well with software. It's called the Manual J calculation, and all the vendors know how to do that. Whether they do it themselves, I don't know. I hope they do. Okay, and a real easy way to get specs on anything is to go to this site, neep.org, and look up the specs, and you'll see oops, I'm going too fast. You'll scroll down and you'll see the specs and then plots of that heat pump performance, the way it would perform in your house. Let's see, I'm trying to advance this. Okay, so this is the little more detailed view of Ken's utility closet. He has this new Mitsubishi inside unit, but he still has the gas hot water tank back, which hopefully at some point in the future he's going to change. This is the Mitsubishi unit outside. It's rather attractive, I think, and they're always on stilts because it snows. You don't want snow to block this thing. This thing works summer and winter. And if you look at the specs on the mounted someplace on the frame of that outside unit, you're going to see the model number, which is the model that I looked up at the NEEP site, and I could learn all about this unit and how it works in Ken's house. So that's sort of my front end pitch, and I hope I didn't take too long. It's probably about 15 minutes. I'd like now to go on. I'm going to stop share, get back to whoever's talking, then will be visible. And we'd like to learn more about Ken. I'd like you to tell me about why did you do this in the first place? What was your incentive and how'd you go about doing it?
Sure. So let me tell you how 95% of the people in this world are going to make this decision.
Yes, in real life.
Steve being in the other 5%. We have a bi-level. We've been here for I don't know, close to 50 years. And we have the original furnace, which is about 55 years old. And we had an air conditioner that was 33 years old. And the furnace was working just fine. I was very happy with it, no problems. I had somebody come out to do an annual performance, maintenance checkup on the air conditioner. And this person, it was from a company that I use for other issues, electric issues, and other heating and plumbing issues and things like that. And he said, "Well, this certainly got your money's worth out of this air conditioner. It's pulling more amps than it should by a small amount, and it's on its last legs. It's going to die." This, by the way, was in the spring of 2023, so like April, May timeframe. And he said, eventually, this thing is working its way to conk out. And I have a background where I have been. Well, first of all, I'm on the committee, the coordinating committee for Empowering New Jersey. And I've been working with Steve and Pat and got involved with them when they put this building electrification team together. So I've read a lot about heat pumps. I learned a lot about climate change. And I clearly understood that we need to transition to heat pumps, that the whole world needs to get off gas and transition to heat pumps. Gas is one of the worst greenhouse gases, natural gas. It's 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide at trapping heat. And about a third of all US climate change is attributed to natural gas emissions. Not the burning of natural gas, but just the natural gas emissions. So it basically makes gas even worse than coal as a total greenhouse gas. And so I knew that when my air conditioner was ready to go, that I wanted to replace it with a heat pump and naturally the furnace. So when I heard that it was at the end of its lifetime, the last thing I wanted was to let it, have it die in the middle of the summer, because that's when it's going to die, when it's pumping away and it's 90 degrees outside. That's for sure when it's going to conk out. So I started planning ahead of time. Probably should have started even earlier, but in the spring. And I asked the person who came out to do the maintenance if he had any experience with heat pumps, and he said, "Sure, we'll give you a bid." And those were the bids that Steve shared with you. And at the same time, I was asking Steve for his reference and as to who he would trust with the heat pump installation. And but I figured I'll have two bids and I'll be able to compare. Well, the first one, as you saw, was so confusing. They bid traditional air conditioners and furnaces, and then they threw in a heat pump on top of it. And when I challenged them, like, why do I need the air conditioner and the furnace if I'm buying a heat pump? Then they said, oh, we'll come back with another bid, and I'll go do some more research, and I'll come back to you with something else. At which point my confidence in that individual and their company was just about zero. And in the meantime, Steve put me in connection with Chris, and I realized that Chris and ICS had tremendous experience with heat pumps. So I felt I didn't need to go look at any other bids, and because I really wasn't going to nitpick this, nickel and dime it. And I went to Chris and was very pleased with the advice he gave me. And we went through a process as well, which took us a month or so, where at first we talked about a hybrid system and having a heat pump but a furnace as a backup that would kick in when it got cold, really cold. And I thought, well, maybe this would be a good solution, and I'd always have the furnace as a backup. And I thought about the fact that we're probably going to sell this house, well, within 10 years for sure. I don't know exactly when. And it would be good to be able to say to the buyer that there's always a gas furnace here as a backup if you don't believe in heat pumps. And then as we got into nailing down the specs further, one of the details was that the furnace would kick in when it got below 30 degrees outside. And I just felt that seemed like an awful lot of gas that we do spend a lot of time, even without these Arctic blasts, which evidently is now the new norm due to climate change. So we'll be colder in winter than we ever were before. But the idea of having it kick in when it's 30 degrees and below just seemed like burning a lot of gas, and there must have been a better way, because I heard about cold weather heat pumps that would work down to 0 degrees and below. So we went around and discussed it further, and that's when Chris talked to me about the Mitsubishi Hyper heat pump. And as Steve mentioned, we also installed an electronic heating system, electric resistance system, I guess Chris can explain it better, that would kick in when it was really cold and would ensure that the house would always be comfortable. And I need to explain how that, I'll go through the algorithm on how the electric unit works, because it has nothing to do with the outside temperature, Steve. And it has an algorithm all unto itself, which is still very mysterious. But all I can say, I'll just say at this point, we've now had some really, really cold weather. The system has worked very well. We're very comfortable. And I am very, very happy that we made this transition. And Steve asked me, because I really hadn't bothered to look. So my goal in this was to get off gas. That was really, really important to me. But Steve pushed me to look at some of my bills and compare from December of last year. Oh, and excuse me, let me back up. So we ended up installing this at the end of October. And my air conditioner worked fine all summer, thank goodness. And I wanted to do it at the end of October when it was, not too hot, not too cold. That gave Chris plenty of time to order the unit and set up a convenient time for all of us. And the installation took 2 days, and it all went very smoothly, and it really all worked well. So it was about 6 months or more between the time that I decided to do this and the time that we actually executed. And we didn't wait till my air conditioner broke on a hot day and then try to figure out how to buy a heat pump, because I think that's almost impossible. But I'll let Chris cover that. But in any case, for the month of December in 2022, our bill was $62, and it went up this year, so that in December it was $138, so that I paid $76 more. But my gas bill went from $161 in December of 2022 to $27 in 2023. So I ended up with, a total savings, I think, of about $58 for that 1 month. And I'm assuming that the savings will increase for me in the summer because the old air conditioner was very inefficient. The new one is super efficient. And I expect that we'll be saving hundreds of dollars or maybe $100 a month in the summer when we're using the air conditioner. So that was kind of the process that we went through, and it was, challenge. It was this week was going to be the acid test to see how well it worked, and thankfully everything is working very well. It does take a little bit of time for it to increase the temperature like 3 or 4 degrees, especially when it's 17 degrees outside. But you have to just understand how it works and maybe plan ahead a little bit and put your thermostat. If you like, we like to sleep in, have it be fairly cool at night. So the normal circumstances, meaning not this Arctic blast that we're under, I would set my thermostat to like 58 degrees. And then with the gas burner, it would heat up, pretty quickly, and it wouldn't be a problem in the morning. With the heat pump, you really can't do that. It's going to take a much longer time to get from like 58 to 67. It's going to take a while. So if that's important to you, you have to think about it ahead of time. And so I would set my thermostat now down to about 62 or 63, and it only then has to climb, 4 degrees in the morning in order to get it to what's a comfortable temperature for us in this house. So let me also just quickly explain how the how the heating unit works. The heater unit has its own algorithm, and as I understand it, and Chris, keep me honest here. What it does is it looks at any time that there's a gap of about 4 degrees, I think it was 3.9 degrees, between the set point and the actual temperature. And if the unit does not increase close that gap by 1.9 degrees within a variable amount of time, in my case, we set it to 14 minutes, then the auxiliary heater will come on. So it could be any temperature outside. If the unit is struggling and is not able to make good progress in reaching the set point, then the auxiliary heater comes on. So Steve, I have no idea how cold, it could be 0 degrees outside, but if the system is working fine, the heater won't go on. So that's how I understand it works. And I have, one of the things is I have no idea whether it's gone on or not. There's no way to really know. But if the house is comfortable, that's fine. So with that, if there are any questions.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm Ken's wife and I am freezing. So whatever you guys are discussing, and ladies, just know, brr.
What?
I need I need a good guy. So let me know if you know anybody who is up on these things. Thanks.
Well, okay, so now you know the truth. No, Elaine is more sensitive to cold than I am. And she, as I'll say this, has not complained about the heat pump. So.
By the way, it really is going well. Sorry to interrupt. He put me up to this.
All right, so at this point, are there any, what do you want to do? You want to do questions? I have to just say, because Steve pointed me towards Chris, I really decided, I really didn't feel the need to go through anything near the level of analysis that Steve went through. I have faith in Steve, and then I had faith in Chris, and just let it go. Don't have to knock yourself out doing infinite amounts of calculus to figure out whether it's a good deal or not.
we quit ask for questions of you if you'd like. You just did, I guess. So
I
Pat?
think Chris had some things that he wanted to say.
Yes.
So why don't we, the questions, there are a bunch of different subjects in the questions. So why don't we let Chris talk and say whatever he has to say.
Yeah, and I think at the same time I could probably answer those questions that I see being asked anyway. I'm going to try to share because I'm a visual guy. So just if you just bear with me here. Let me try to share the presentation here.
Oh, I didn't see the chat. Okay.
All right, so I'm just rehashing other heat pump presentations, but here is Ken's particular project. And Steve, you were mentioning what the design temperature is. The design temperature actually that we go by for the manual J is 10 degrees. So in order to figure out how much heat does Ken's house need, there's a thing, there's a load calculation done. It's called a manual J. Right. And it's based on the fact that historically in that area, 10 degrees is the design temperature, meaning that 99% of the days will be 10 degrees or warmer. Only 1% of the days would be colder than 10 degrees. So you're really trying to get a system design that will meet that criteria. And the criteria also with the with Ken also is Ken very early on let me know that he likes to keep the house really cold. That's why you saw his wife complaining. So and it was a very low temperature actually, right? But which is fine. I've had people tell me, oh, we keep the house at 60. But honestly, if you're going to sell the house, if other people move in there, if somebody changes, most people have a range between for heating for like 67 to 72 or so, right? So I went with the low end. 67 is a very respectable low temperature. So the load calculation was done on the fact that we can keep a 67-degree indoor temperature. And I see my head's blocking it, but Steve, you were trying to guess at the heat loss calculation for Ken's house, and it comes out to be about I think 54. I have the next slide. Let's see. 52,000 BTUs. So Ken's house needs 52,000 BTUs to properly heat it at the 10-degree design temperature. So the issue was the heat pump we have, it's only, actually, let me go down to the next slide. I think I have it. I have it here. So Ken's particular heat pump actually produces at that temperature around, it doesn't really say it at 10, but when you graph it out, it's about 48,000 BTUs or so. So we're short on the BTUs. So that's why the electric heater needed to be there anyway. Will Ken ever have the electric heater turn on? Maybe not, because he keeps it a lot colder. So maybe not. It all depends. But the reason the electric heater is there is because the heat pump wasn't quite big enough in capacity to handle it. Now, are there bigger heat pumps? Yeah, but then we'd be overdoing it. We'd be killing it with oversizing the system, and at the same time possibly oversizing the cooling end of it. So this was the equipment selection criteria, was that, hey, we're almost there to meet his heating needs. We just need a little bit of electric heat, which if the electric heat turns on, it's going to be very infrequent throughout the year. Yes, the electric heat does draw more power than anything else. And if it's some kind of Arctic blast where we have 5 degrees every day for, 48 hours straight or something like that, then yeah, it will run up the bill. But those are unlikely situations. Again, those are the 1% situations. So the electric heat is there just to make sure nobody freezes in the house, to make sure you're comfortable, but it will not make a huge impact in the entirety of your whole year of using the system. So that's how the criteria for choosing the size system and the capacity of what the system is. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about too is I always mention that not all heat pumps are the same. There's a lot of, and I think Steve, you had a great graph showing different balance point and all that. And actually, one of the things that we've always done early on is, and this is not Steve's particular equipment, but this is just an example of a bunch of different heat pumps that are out there on the market. And what do they do at different temperatures? And you can see these are all the same capacity heat pumps from different manufacturers. So you can see some manufacturers produce a lot of heat, some very little, some drop like a rock when temperatures become cold. So it's a matter of like which heat pump is really good for you. If Ken's objective was that I want to use as much heat pump as possible, then we picked a cold weather heat pump that can perform at those temperatures and still be very produce a large amount of heat. Because some of them will just not produce that heat, and then the electric heater will kick in. I'll use the electric heater a lot more often. So that's also a criterion, kind of picking out the correct heat pump. And the old saying, you get what you pay for, is definitely true. Cheaper equipment will result in poorer performance. It's just what it is. The other thing too, and I know, some of the other things you put up there, I don't think the Amana, but definitely the Bosch is an inverter compressor. My professional point of view, if you're going to do heat pump, you want to do an inverter type heat pump. An inverter type heat pump is basically a compressor that's variable speed. It's able to ramp up and down. If you get a very, and I'm going to use the word cheap, heat pump that just turns on and off, you're not going to have a good experience, especially with monetary savings. A on-off type standard compressor type heat pump. And what I mean by that is basically when the compressor turns on, it just works at 100%. When it turns off, it's 0%. There's no in between. It doesn't know. So whether it's 55 degrees outside or 35 degrees outside, the compressor is going to act the same way. That kind of system is fine for climates like South Carolina, North Carolina, but in our environment, you're probably going to get a bad heat pump experience. So if you go on the internet and you hear people complaining about heat pumps are costing me more, that's usually because it's the wrong either wrong size and or wrong equipment. So if you're going to pick any heat pump, it's definitely pick an inverter type heat pump, which there's a lot of companies that make that. It's just a unit that's able to dial in exactly how much heat to deliver. And that's really where the savings and the comfort come from. The other sort of consideration, and this is not I think I got a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to picture of the actual unit that Steve thinks is very attractive. You must be the only guy thinking that. We found, and this is not a metric that's going to be published out there, but it's shared through a lot of professional, HV installers, that the Japanese style heat pumps, the ones that are side discharge, the ones that have the fans blowing out sideways instead of top, are a lot better for cold climate applications because they tend not to gather snow and frost and things like that around their coils. So a standard traditional air conditioning unit that looks like a box and blows up, it's got a coil all around. And when you have sleet, freezing rain, things like that, that coil tends to get packed up with snow, and it doesn't tend to defrost as well as this kind of a unit. And that's a metric that's not published anywhere. It's just, it's like, here's how the keeper performs. But if you got freezing rain, if you got snow going on, it's going to build up on the coil, and you might have to yourself get out there and clean it off, or obviously, it will trigger a service call. So regular heat pumps, no big difference. But if you're going to go cold climate, that's going to experience snow, freezing rain, things of that sort, the kind of heat pump we're looking at, which different manufacturers make that, Daikin, Mitsubishi, I call them Japanese style because that's essentially what they really are. The side discharge units perform better. I'm not sure if there are any, I think between Ken and Steve, you guys really kind of covered it. I'm not sure what else I can help answer about the project.
I will jump in and say that it does occasionally shut down for defrosting, but it only takes about 2 to 3 minutes. It's weird. I cannot explain it, and I've asked, but generally it happens in the morning, and you'll hear the fan speed increase, and you'll feel like, okay, it's really revving up, and suddenly, boom, it goes off. And the unit says, the message I get on my phone is that it's in defrost mode. But then 2 or 3 minutes later it comes on, and then it will run all day, and I don't think go into defrost again. I have no freaking idea why that's the process, why it works that way, but that's what it seems to be.
Yeah, it's an algorithm. It's based on many different conditions and sensors. So that's when you have a nicer, fancier unit, it will make those defrost determinations based on the conditions, which means that defrost will happen as it needs to happen, versus some cheaper units that are based on a time. So it's like some of the cheaper units will be they run for a certain amount of time, they'll just automatically go to defrost. Sometimes they don't even need to, so they're wasting sort of precious time and energy. You'll find with, and I know Ken, you found this with Japanese systems, there's a lot left to be desired in terms of user friendliness. They like to engineer things. They like to have complicated algorithms because they don't plan on you touching it or understanding. That's their job. You just go press heat, put your temperature, and enjoy it.
Yeah, and the one thing that we were going to do, because we had this with our old system, is we had a programmable thermostat. And I intended very much to do the same with this. And I, can have the capability now to do it and to preset, to set the times when, the temperature would start coming up in the morning and shut down at night. And frankly, now that I've got the ability to do it on my phone, I'm feeling like I'm better off and in more control, and I can use it the way I want just by manually setting it on using my phone. So I don't know that I would ever use the automatic system. It just doesn't seem like it's worth the effort now.
Yeah, one of the learning curves that we teach every customer is that you talked about it at the beginning too. These systems are built to be like snails. They're not sprinters. The efficiency comes from them working slowly, and it's actually, you're better off leaving them on, letting them do their thing. If you're turning them off and setting them back a lot, and then you expect them to make 10 degrees in a couple hours, well, that's just not what they do. And that gets one of those things that you have to get used to as a user of the system, because a lot of people, they have the mentality of like, hey, I'm turning off my furnace, I'm not using gas, I'm not using whatever it is, and I'm saving and I'm coming back in and not turning it back on. It's a little bit of a different mentality. When you're doing that to the heat pump, you're actually not saving as much as you would if you just let it be.
Yeah, I do the changes for comfort.
Right, slight changes of course are expected.
Yeah, and the system does whatever it does. Just our comfort is top priority. There was a question here, and I guess it was addressed to me, whether this was using our AC existing ductwork, and the answer is yes. Without that ductwork, this would have been a totally different project. We would never have done it this way. And I think somebody asked what the temperature is in our home. Right now, it's about 67. We also have a wood-burning stove. And we use that more just at cold nights in the winter, just because we like it. We like the way it feels, and it heats up most of the house for a few hours. And so right now our stove is going, and it probably, will get up to like 70, 71 degrees with the stove. And then the heat pump's off during that period, but it's not because we want to turn the heat pump off. It's just because we like using the wood burning stove. So, and I view it as another resilience aspect to what we've done with our house.
Okay, why don't we start the Q&A now? I'll go back to the beginning. Brian, you may have rethought your question since you put it in, but you've seen what it takes to determine the size that you need, and you need a whole lot more input data than you have there. I don't know if Chris has any other comment.
Yeah, I'm just looking at no, you can't answer that from a webinar. I mean, you need to do a load calculation. You need to put your eyes on the house. You really do, to answer that question.
There's another question here, and I actually have the same question. It says, one question my wife has about heat pumps is whether or not the heat is drying. And I expected much less drying than with the gas furnace, where you're actually burning in open air and sending stuff up the chimney, but it still does dry out the air. not to the same extent, but it does dry out the air. And in these conditions, with this thing running almost 24/7, our air got pretty dry. Chris, can you explain why that happens? Because all you're doing is moving heat from one place to another.
Yeah, you're
Why does it
technically,
dry
yeah,
out the
you're
heat?
technically not drying out the air. You're not removing humidity with it. You shouldn't feel it's sort of a feel. I mean, the low humidity is there because we have low humidity outside. And if you don't have a humidifier introducing more humidity, the infiltration in your house, you're going to lose that moisture, right? Unless somebody in the house is taking showers, cooking, and introducing more moisture. Some houses are sometimes dry, and that's why you need a humidifier. But the output temperature of the heat pump is way lower than a furnace. I mean, the furnace is 130 plus degrees, way more sometimes than that. The heat pump will range between 85 to 100 degrees output of temperature. So you shouldn't feel as dry, but it's still a hot air system. So, with hot air systems, that air is a little bit warmer, and the relative humidity, definitely does go down.
Okay, someone is asking about sharing the presentation, and I'm sure both Steve's slides and Chris's slides people would like to see. Steve does normally send out to everyone who registers the copy of the recording and also copy of the slides. And we would be planning to do that as long as it's okay with Chris. And I'm not sure we asked Chris yet.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll make it available.
Okay.
So I see
All right.
Jim Price answered the question the same way you did, Chris, that the house is leaky. And it very well may be. We did not do the energy audit. I just knew I wanted this heat pump, and we went for it, for better or for worse. There's another question here about power backup. We happen to have a Generac that runs on gas that'll do the whole house. So yes, it backs up the heat pump. But even if you had a gas furnace, you still need electricity for the blower. And if you don't have a backup for that, it doesn't make any difference that the gas furnace is working properly. You're still not going to have any heat. So yeah, backup power system can be really important.
Good point. This is off the topic, but maybe if anyone in the audience has an idea about this, someone is asking about an electric lawnmower. If you know anything about that, put it in the chat, please. Okay. Here, Steve has some information about this, and I'm sure Chris does also. What are some names of hot water heaters that are sustainable? A friend in Texas just lost his hot water heater, and they need it soon. But Steve has bought a couple of different hot water heaters for 2 different houses
recently. So yes, heat pump water heaters are the way to go. And the 2 top manufacturers are Rheem and A.O. Smith. I'll get closer to the mic.
The first
A.O.
one
Smith,
you said was Rheem, right?
Rheem, RHEEM, and
Okay.
A.O. Smith. The A.O. Smith has an advantage for a utility closet that is on your main floor next to you in your house if you don't have a basement. Ken's utility room, though, is, I'm not sure where. It looks like it's buried way in back, so maybe they'll work. But A.O. Smith has a noise spec. It's like 45 dBA. It's like 10 or 20 dB lower. It's like yelling versus whispering. It's lower output noise with A.O. Smith. And so that matters if that A.O. Smith, if the hot water tank, heat pump tank is near you and operating. If it's in the basement, someplace isolated, Ken's remote closet, I think it's okay. But Rheem would be fine for that. But A.O. Smith, if it's in a sensitive spot in your house, that's my answer.
And you just bought yours from
A.O. Smith,
from Lowe's, didn't
yeah,
you?
A.O. Smith is sold by Lowe's and Rheem is sold by Home Depot.
Oh.
And they'll deliver to your house. You just give somebody to hook it up for you.
John says, I'm trying to do the same estimations to convince my wife that we should go to a heat pump. And Pete said, it took me a year to convince my lovely bride that our solar system wasn't just a ploy for another shiny toy.
I was just gonna, well, I noticed that my friend Kirk Frost had his hand up at some point. Kirk, did you have a question? Maybe.
Yeah, I saw that too. But he also has questions in the Q&A.
Oh,
So,
okay.
um,
Oh, I
Kirk,
see.
if you
He's
get back,
responding on the electric lawnmower.
there are a lot of questions in the Q&A.
Oh, he's saying he
Okay.
can't unmute himself. No, you have to unmute him, right?
Yeah. Well,
All right. Well,
I'm not sure.
okay.
Let's
Could I
see.
could I answer something here about lawnmowers? Matt Kavanaugh actually talked about lawn equipment and the advantage you can get batteries that are usable across multiple pieces of lawn equipment, and that's probably the way to go. Home Depot and Lowe's carry those, and so you should settle on one manufacturer and then buy common batteries for those devices. Does that help that question? I haven't read the question, so I don't know.
I think the question was very open-ended, so that's part of it. Brian says, I live in Monmouth County. How do you pick a contractor? Well, last month we had Scott Nelson on, who's in Allenhurst, Monmouth County, and we've used him. We don't have a very good database of contractors. In fact, I think the only two that we're able to recommend right now are Chris and Scott Nelson. Although we would always recommend that you go to at least 2 or 3 different ones. When we installed the heat pump that Steve was talking about, it was a couple of years ago, and we didn't really know very much about it. And Steve just, I think he asked 6 or 7 different,
Eight different.
8. But Steve knew what he wanted. He had already done the calculations. He knew we wanted to use our existing gas furnaces back up, because we didn't know very much about cold climate heat pumps at that point. And the system was a ream. So Steve said, I need a ream. I need it to be X tons, whatever it was. And the only viable estimate he got was from this company in Old Bridge named Mancini, and they came up. They didn't even come to the house. They said, if this is what you want, we have it in stock. We can install it tomorrow, and it'll cost you $5,000.
Actually, it was less than that. It came out to 4,000 something. So that was cheap. It was very
So we
inexpensive.
said, okay. And we got it the next day, and it's worked fine ever since. That was 2 years ago.
But that reminds me, we should talk about the costs for my system. I'll let Chris maybe, refine this, but I also ordered we had have a whole house filter installed at the same time. And I think that was about $2,000, but the basic system, along with some, monitoring and other services, was $20,000.
Somebody asked that in the Q&A, so that question was going to come up. So thanks for that, Ken.
And I see there was a question about electricity at my house. I mean, I'm not sure what that means. We have JCP&L. And by the way, there were no rebates on this available from, rebates now come from the gas and electric companies, not the BPU. And I looked it up and then asked Chris, and Chris reminded me what he told me when we first started. There were no rebates, but I do get the $2,000 credit from the IRA, tax credit.
Chris, a question for you. Is that because this is not rated Energy Star?
Yes, so we went to a certain size of equipment, cold weather heat pump that obviously met the performance, but it's just shy of that rating. And one thing I tell people is don't go chasing rebates if they don't make sense. I mean, I think the first version that we picked for Ken, we had a different setup with the hybrid that did make a rebate. But this version did not. Here's the thing in New Jersey with the rebate. So rebate is going to be a couple $100. Maybe if there's a certain heat pump in the JCP&L territory, I think it's $1,000. That's nice. It's nice, but and if it works for your project, that's great. But other than that, the only other thing it does, it gives you, if you have a system that is able to make a rebate, you're able to potentially qualify for 0% financing through either JCP&L or PSE&G. That's the only sort of other advantage. But there's a threshold on the rebates, right? Somebody has to make a benchmark, say this is the number. If you look at the specs of that equipment, it's just right under that number. So it's like, okay, it didn't make a rebate, but it's pretty much really efficient for what it does.
Okay, thanks for that. Pete Marsh has just given a Facebook link for Nate the House Whisperer,
Yep.
and you can get a lot of information from that. So he recommends that. Oh my goodness. I just got a notice I have 20 new messages. Okay. And we talked about the ducts.
Yeah, there's a question here. What was included in the $20,000? There was no hot water heater in that. It was the air conditioner and the furnace.
The heat pump. Well, it was the complete installation, which is the electric backup, supplemental heating that needed electric power. So it was had to upgrade the electric as well. That's one of the things that has to go into consideration a lot of times. If you're getting just a pure heat pump that you're swapping out for the AC, and you're restricting the heat pump size to be the same size of AC, generally speaking, you don't need to upgrade electric. But if you're trying to run the whole house off a heat pump and you're trying to go cold weather heat pump, pretty much all of them will require more power than your regular AC. So upgrading the power is part of it too.
And as crazy as they were, the original bids, the bids that I got from that first company were in the $17,000, $18,000 range anyway. So I figured this wasn't totally off. This wasn't wild.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if you can answer this off the cuff, Chris, but Brian asked, our square footage on 2 levels is probably 2,500 square feet. How do I handle 2 zones?
I don't know anything about the house, but if it's 2 separate floors, is that what I guess is being said?
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Let's assume that he has 2 furnaces now.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways to handle it, but having 2 separate zones is definitely a good thing because it's very hard to control 2 vertical levels with one system. That's like my number one client. We come into their house and it's like hot upstairs, cold downstairs, vice versa. Doing one system in a house like that is difficult. So 2 systems is fine. Listen, depending on the size of the equipment, you could potentially have one of those Mitsubishi heat pump units outside that's connected to 2 ducted units inside. So that's possible. But I mean, besides knowing more details, I don't really know how to answer that question.
That's kind of what I figured. Okay.
I think Kirk is asking a question that I actually have in my presentation that I actually put it on there. Would anyone know the annual kilowatt hour consumption for Kent's heat pump? And according to those numbers I put up, there's lots of factors, of course. I mean, how Ken uses it and all that, and weather, things like that. But the estimated consumption would be 20,000 kilowatts a year. And that's including heating and cooling the entire year for air conditioning and heat pump cycle.
If I could just add something, this is Francie. Chris installed my system also, and what he told me about ahead of time, I saw once the time had passed. You're going to save a lot more money from the air conditioning part of the usage than you will of the. I mean, you'll save plenty of money on the heat, because I finally got my whole yearly statistics, and I have been saving a lot of money on energy to heat and cool my house with the mini split heat pumps. But you especially save money during the hot weather, because they are just so much more efficient in energy usage than traditional, air conditioning systems. So you got to, what I learned is that, you got to look at what season we're talking about, and then you can, of course, add it up over the course of the whole year. I mean, the other thing was, I'm sorry, I tuned in late, but I don't know if Chris also talked about the J manual calculations that, as far as, trying to figure out how much it's going to cost and how much you're going to get per square footage of the house. There's so many other factors involved. I live in an one floor apartment, but my ceilings are extremely high. I have very big windows. So those each are other factors that really influence the heating and cooling, as the case may be. And then also how many sides are exposed of my rooms are exposed to the out of doors. So for example, I'm on a corner apartment. So almost all of my walls are exterior walls for almost all my rooms. So there's so many different factors that go into figuring out how much you need to heat a room, how much you need to cool a room, the exposure, whether it faces south or north, as well as, how much cubic footage you're looking at. So it really is complicated. And, of all the people that I had come and take a look at my job, Chris was the only one who really looked at all the factors that are involved in doing a true, J manual calculation, which, is what you need to do to try to figure out, just how much heating capacity and how much cooling capacity.
Yeah, he did describe that. And we haven't even talked about weatherizing your house, which is normally the first thing we recommend that you do. You need to air seal and insulate your house and make sure that you're not heating the whole outdoors. Good point. Okay. Does Chris work in Morris County?
Yeah, I answered that directly to the person that
okay.
asked. So yeah, the answer is yes.
How do you find a contractor that makes the heat pump a priority? Right now, you really have to be your own advocate. That one of the projects that we have in the future is to hopefully have a training education course for anyone who is working in this field, because we want to change the mindset. I mean, now a lot of people don't even know about electric heat pumps, and you obviously this is a big training hole that needs to be filled.
Speaking of that, our webinar for next time in February 15th is a recent graduate of electrification coach training. So we're going to hear firsthand what it consists of. and what they've learned. And maybe other people might want to volunteer to be a coach.
Oh, Kirk says he can't unmute himself. Well,
Still somebody in the waiting room.
yeah, I just let her in. I just
Okay.
saw that. Where's Kirk? Okay. Well, it says for me to ask to unmute, which I did. Okay.
Yeah, so the question was, is it best to work on improving the house's efficiency, weatherproofing, and et cetera, prior to installing a heat pump? Well, yeah, but most of these are going to be like the furnace fails today, and you have really cold weather underway. And so it's an emergency. And you're not going to be thinking about trying to weatherize first for sure.
Okay. Oh, so Callie is giving us a couple of HVAC contractors. Pat Ryan of Ryan Builds in Union, Arctic Air in Old Bridge.
Yeah, no direct experience, but recommended by someone and sent by someone else.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. We also we used Princeton Air for our daughter's house close to Princeton.
Mhm. Yep, they're good.
Princeton Air features Mitsubishi heat pumps. So it seems like everybody features one. They're trained in certain model or certain line. And so everybody, probably including Chris, has certain manufacturers he wants to focus on. Is that true, Chris?
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, there's going to be contractors that are married to certain products. There's definitely those contractors that only have one or two products and they don't stray away from it. So no matter what, they're going to come in and recommend those products to you, right? So that's one of the things. Now, we've worked with almost every product. Like when we choose to do heat pumps where it's going to be your especially primary source of heat, one of the things I mentioned is that inverter. That's like my criteria, that it has to be an inverter. But we also deal with Daikin as well. Mitsubishi just happens to be king of the hill, in our opinion, just from reliability standpoint of view. Everybody focuses on metrics of energy efficiency and things like that. Those are all nice to compare. At the end of the day, do you want to pay for stuff that breaks down in 6 years, right? So reliability is number one from my standpoint of view. And Mitsubishi happens to be one of those products where just like, I'm happy installing it because if it's installed right, we don't have problems with it. I mean, there's been plenty of products in our history and everybody contractors history. They install stuff for a while, then it comes back to bite them because just some manufacturers don't have the same reliability, and you stay away from that. So every contractor probably has that experience with some brand. That's why they focus on a couple, brands that they carry.
I have one big question.
I don't know if it's still true, but the other thing that I was told and why I went with Mitsubishi is that in terms of if you do need a replacement part, their customer service and the availability of replacement parts is superior to a lot of other companies. Do you still think that's true, Chris?
Yes and no, depends. It's been hit or miss. COVID's kind of screwed up everybody. So there was pockets of problems with that, but quite frankly, it's with everybody. Yeah, I mean, Mitsubishi gets you 12 years parts warranty, and they have a strong network around the country. So they're powerhouse. They're not one of these companies that uses third-party vendors to get their parts a lot. So a lot of manufacturers will just use other people's parts too. So that's kind of like out of their hands. It sometimes sucks because now they don't really have access to it, and they have to scramble and figure something else out. Mitsubishi is one of those products that really has everything in-house, and they have their stuff together.
Chris, I have $1 million question, and it's really bugging me. And it's the continuing bids that include a gas furnace for backup. So many people are now bidding heat pumps, but then installing a gas backup, and it bugs me. Why is that? And how can we change it?
Listen, there could be a good reason for it. I mean, from my standpoint of view, we do that because I have a lot of customers who are not Sierra Club members. They just mentally, they want that thing of like, I just need a gas furnace. You know, you can give them all the metrics and they just can't get over it. They like the heat pump concept, but they've read stuff on the internet, the bad information, you know, and they want that. That's number one. Number two, there could be a good reason. I mean, there could be a house that's got such a low cooling load versus a heating load that it makes sense that we need so much heat that we're going to need you know, a gas-fired furnace. That's one reason. Or they're putting in a heat pump that's not that capable of those low temperatures, and that's why they need the furnace. So there could be good viable reasons for it. I mean, honestly, you could do away with a furnace in any house, right? But just how much money do you have?
Okay, I'm at Kirk's question now, so I'm unable to find a source that compares the heat pump manufacturers. I know you tried to do this just now, Chris, but installers tend to install only their one or the brands that they carry. NEEP doesn't really compare each heat pump. Sounds like Mitsubishi is one of the better ones. You said that, but is there any source that we could look up online to compare different brands?
Well, it's NEEP is great. I mean, Steve pointed out NEEP. NEEP is great. You just have to get the data from it and do your own sort of comparison. I showed a snapshot of my presentation of us plotting this stuff because we did that internally in Excel sheets for ourselves to make decisions with different units, and because we install like Carrier Infinity units and other things, and then in order for us to make the best decision, we have to physically see stuff on the chart. You know, what does it do at this temperature? And so it's easy when we put it in our database, but that's what you're going to have to do as a customer. The information on NEEP is fantastic because they have everything very detailed. You're just going to have to manually write it down, print it out, and do your own comparisons.
I found one source that's in my website that is like a trade journal comparing mini splits, and they ranked the top three being Mitsubishi, Fujitsu, and Daikin. And so from that information, you can then go find the HVAC vendors that carry each of those brands. And I talk about that in my website. And so that's a way to get, if you want a mini split, that's a way to get a mini split bid for the three top brands. And you choose one of the three.
Yeah. And Mary Rose points out again, it is best. I think she puts it as a question, but it is best to work on improving the house's efficiency, weatherproofing prior to installing a heat pump. Yes, indeed.
Question here from Ennis. What is the lowest temperature the cold weather Mitsubishi is good for?
The particular one in Kent's house, technically they call it's rated down to minus 13 degrees, which means they test it at minus 13 that you know, of what it puts out and all the metrics, and they publish it. But in reality, it's supposed to actually work down to minus 18. It's no longer rated. It's, you know, well, hopefully we'll never have those days, but it's supposed to work down to minus 18 degrees. Now, what it's doing at minus 16, minus 17, minus 18, they don't have that data. That's kind of, but it will work. It will be doing something.
Okay.
Francie is talking. Francie, you're on mute.
Oh, yeah. I mean, right now my heat pumps are, you know, it's not as warm as, because it's so cold out, it's not as warm as it was last week. But, you know, we close off the rooms that we're not in so that because there's sort of like a limited amount of refrigerant. So I want to divert it and use it in the rooms that we are occupying. in order to shift the heat around, or I use a little space heater if it's particularly drafty in one room or the other. So Chris actually recommended that we get a little bit more baseboard electric supplemental heating, and we didn't want to spend the money at the time. We said, well, see how it goes. So I don't know, we'll see how it is by the end of this winter, but we might be revisiting and going through with Chris's suggestion to put a little bit more supplemental heating for the very cold times like this. I would never put my furnace back in. I wouldn't need that at all, but it's sort of the equivalent of a space heater. It might be all I really need.
Yeah, I will say that ours is as comfortable as we want it to be. We're fine,
Well, different, your house might not have as much exposures and you might be better insulated than me.
Yeah.
But
And Marty points out that Rewiring America does offer the electrification coach training. That's where our speaker for next month, Betsy, is going to be, where she was certified, and so she's going to talk about that program. And others, I think Ernie, who's on this call, also is on the waiting list. I don't know if he got into this February 1st course or not. We're about 3 minutes over now. I think I've gotten to the bottom of all the questions. If there's someone who has one last question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it. But other people, we're not going to get to the, I had told Steve that I would talk about the tax credits and rebates from the IRA if we had time, but we don't have time for that. We had a really, really good discussion tonight, I thought. And I really appreciate all the comments and questions that people gave. And I especially appreciate Chris and Ken for all their insight into what has happened. Steve needs to tell us about next month.
Yes. So thank you, Pat. That was really great. So thank you all for joining us. This was our 24th monthly webinar. We have the next one scheduled February 15th, 7 p.m. And it's still a possible speaker, Pat. We've talked about it, but I don't have a commitment yet. But we would learn about the electrification coach training. And maybe some people would like to do it themselves. So we'll see what happens. You can register for any of the webinars at that shortened URL. So I appreciate you all joining us. Any last words, Pat?
Not from me.
Okay. Thank you all.
thank you.
See you in a month.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, all.